July 1942, over the blackened fields of Europe. Istean o twine my paint feeds mind. A new sound begins to haunt the skies. Not the deep thrum of piston engines. Not the rhythmic roar of propeller-driven dogfights, but something alien. A rising metallic shriek that sounds more machine than aircraft. Like the sky itself is tearing open. At first, Allied pilots don't know what to make of it. Then they see it. Sleek. Fast. Without a propeller. Moving like nothing else in the war-torn sky. It doesn't dance in dogfights. It doesn't turn. It hunts, straight line fast, impossible to catch, and impossible to escape. And then it vanishes, leaving behind the wreckage of a bomber, the screams of a dead crew, and a question. What the hell was that? The answer lay in Germany, and in a man no one in the Luftwaffe had trusted for a decade. A man whose ideas were called unrealistic, inefficient, even dangerous. A man who had been mocked out of boardrooms, ignored by generals, and nearly jailed for wasting government funds. His name was Hans Joachim Pabst von Ohain. A soft-spoken engineer, not a fighter pilot, not a soldier, just a dreamer who believed the future of flight didn't involve spinning propellers at all. He believed in jet propulsion, and for a long time, that belief made him a joke. Because in the 1930s, Germany's military aviation was obsessed with Messerschmitts, with dive bombers, with the proven, the practical. Propellers were king. Jet engines were for science fiction novels and barroom fantasists. Von Ohain's earliest prototype, a crude, shaky engine attached to a plywood frame, nearly exploded during its first test. He was laughed out of the Air Ministry. One colonel allegedly sneered, "We are building weapons, not toys." But one man didn't laugh. Ernst Heinkel, a wealthy aircraft designer with a taste for revenge against the Luftwaffe's bureaucracy, saw potential in von Ohain's madness. He funded the research privately, in secret, under the noses of the generals. The first true test of the jet engine came in August 1939, just days before Hitler invaded Poland. A small aircraft called the Heinkel He-178 flew for 6 minutes, powered only by von Ohain's revolutionary turbojet. It was the first jet-powered flight in history. But by the time he landed, the war had already begun, and no one in Berlin cared. 40. The Luftwaffe was conquering the skies over France and the Low Countries. No one saw a need for an engine that couldn't fly farther than a conventional fighter, that burned through fuel like a tank on fire, and overheated after 20 minutes. Von Ohain's files were shelved. His prototype engines were buried in the back of hangars. By 1941, he was reassigned to a research post, effectively exiled from the core war effort. But in a twist of historical irony, it wasn't the generals who brought him back, it was fear, because in late 1941, German intelligence intercepted reports of strange engine tests happening in Britain. No propellers, high speeds, blueprints from British scientists suggesting they were working on jets. Suddenly, the thing von Ohain had been mocked for was now an urgent national priority. The same officers who laughed at him were now demanding working engines, but he refused, not out of spite, out of principle. He told them the old prototypes were flawed, dangerous, underdeveloped. If they wanted a real weapon, they needed time, freedom, and full control over the airframe design. In a war where every week cost thousands of lives, the Luftwaffe gave him 6 months. What came out of that 6 months would terrify Allied airmen for the rest of the war. By March 1942, von Ohain's team, working in a secret facility near Rostock, unveiled the Heinkel He-280, a sleek, twin-engine jet fighter with no propeller, no nose spinner, and no warning. It flew faster than any Allied aircraft in existence. It climbed like a rocket. It could intercept bombers before they ever reached their targets, make one devastating pass, and vanish before the escorts even saw it. The He-280 never made it into mass production, but it didn't need to, because it proved the concept, and once again, von Ohain was pushed aside, this time by Willy Messerschmitt, who promised the Luftwaffe something even better. The Messerschmitt Me-262. And this, at last, was the machine Allied pilots would learn to fear. But even as the Me-262 moved toward production, von Ohain watched from a distance, bitter and silent. His engine, the one Germany once rejected, was now reborn in the wings of the Reich's most terrifying war machine, the world's first operational jet fighter, and its arrival would change the war forever. April 1944, 25,000 feet over Bavaria, a formation of B-17 flying fortresses crawled eastward, engines thundering, gunners scanning the blue dome above for any sign of movement. These were hardened crews, men who had flown through flak storms over Schweinfurt, who had faced down Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts, who had watched friends burn in aluminum coffins over Normandy. But today, there was something new. They saw it before they heard it. A silver dart, shimmering against the sun, streaking down at an angle no piston engine fighter could sustain. No turning, no weaving, just a straight-line dive, like a falling god. One bomber vanished in seconds. No strafing, no prolonged attack run, just one brutal pass. A jet of cannon fire, then it was gone, out of range before any Mustang escort could turn. What the hell was that? One tail gunner screamed into his headset, his voice cracking. No answer. The radios filled with static and fear. By the time the formation reached target, 3 more fortresses were gone. No evasive maneuvers could save them. No escort could catch the attacker. Because that attacker wasn't a plane in the traditional sense, it was the Messerschmitt Me-262, and it was unlike anything the Allies had ever seen. The Me-262 was the culmination of Hans Joachim von Ohain's once-rejected vision. 2 Junkers, Jumo, Noe V. 4 turbojets mounted under sleek, swept wings, a design so clean it looked sculpted by wind, a nose housing 4 30mm autocannons, more than enough to rip through the thickest bomber skin in a single pass. But what truly made it terrifying was speed. The Me-262 cruised at 540 mph, nearly 200 mph faster than anything in the Allied arsenal. That meant traditional dogfighting was obsolete. P-51 Mustangs could turn tighter, but they couldn't catch it. Spitfires could climb faster from low altitude, but the 262 never started at low altitude. It always came down from above. It was a Raptor, not a duelist. Even worse, it didn't need to stay and fight. Just one pass, one clean strike, and the Me-262 would retreat behind flak batteries and vanish into the clouds. Untouchable. By summer, it was being called the Turbo Terror. And Allied pilots? They didn't laugh at jet engines anymore. They dreaded them. But behind the miracle of the Me-262 was a bitter irony. Hans von Ohain had nothing to do with its production. His original blueprints were gutted, modified, improved by rival engineers. The Luftwaffe wanted speed, not perfection. They wanted firepower, not philosophy. Willy Messerschmitt had promised Göring a wonder weapon, and the High Command wanted it yesterday. Hitler, fascinated by the jet's speed, demanded it be converted into a fighter bomber, a ludicrous decision that delayed the 262's deployment for nearly a year. Von Ohain protested. Quietly, of course. He was used to being ignored. He watched as the Reich threw away the engine's potential for a political fantasy, a BIB machine that could strike England and return untouched. Never mind that the Me-262 was terrible at low-speed ground attacks, or that its jet engines took 30 seconds to spool up, making it helpless on takeoff and landing. The pilots called it the Widowmaker, not because of combat losses, but because if you were caught during takeoff, you were dead. Still, in the right hands, in the air, it was lethal, and the Allies knew it. August 1944, in a secret intelligence report to Eisenhower, British analysts warned the Me-262, if deployed in sufficient numbers, could establish German air superiority over the Western Front within weeks. The numbers were terrifying. One Me-262 could destroy a bomber per mission and escape unharmed. Their fuel consumption was catastrophic, but Germany was running low on oil anyway. Quantity didn't matter. Fear did. By October, Allied bomber crews began spotting jet trails and hearing the Banshee sound, a high-pitched shriek that signaled a Me-262 pass. Some gunners refused to fire, paralyzed by the blur. Others emptied magazines in blind panic, only to hit empty sky. They began to say, "If the jets are up, we're not coming back." Von Ohain heard this phrase, smuggled into Germany through Swiss intermediaries. He was haunted, not because he regretted building the engine, but because it had become exactly what the generals had always wanted. A symbol of terror, not a tool of transformation. But there was another problem. One the Allies hadn't noticed yet. The Me-262's engine, the Jumo 04, was brilliant, but fragile. Each unit lasted maybe 25 hours before needing total replacement. The metals used in the turbine blades couldn't withstand the heat. Germany was out of chromium and nickel. The war effort was burning through jets faster than it could build them. Von Ohain knew this too, and in a final act of quiet sabotage, he began suppressing improved designs, blueprints for better alloys, cooling innovations, designs that would have made the Me-262 a true war changer. He buried them, not in protest, not as a traitor, but because he understood what he had created. The engine had started as a dream. It had become a nightmare. And von Ohain, the man once laughed out of every office in Berlin, now held the power to determine just how much damage his rejected engine would do before the war ended. December 1944, the snow-covered airfields of Western Europe were choked with wreckage. Burned-out P-47s, shredded B-24s, half-buried gliders, and above it all, pilots whispered about ghosts. Not spirits. Jets. Fast, quiet until the final second, and always deadly. If the prop-driven Luftwaffe had been a menace, then the Me-262 was an executioner. It didn't fight. It ended fights, and now it was everywhere. Or at least, it felt like it was everywhere. The truth was different, and far more maddening to Allied command. The Reich had produced barely 300 operational Me-262s. Of those, only about 50 were active at any given time due to parts shortages, fuel scarcity, and the fragile jet engines that cracked after 10-15 missions. But that didn't matter. Because in war, perception kills. A single 262 could hit a bomber formation, down 2 aircraft in one pass, and then vanish into cloud before a single escort could lock on. By Christmas 1944, it wasn't about damage anymore. It was about psychological warfare. The Me-262 was Goebbels' golden phantom, proof that Germany still had teeth. It was featured in propaganda films, shown rocketing past helpless Allied fighters. German schoolboys were told that jets would turn the tide, that Hitler's vengeance would come from the sky. In reality, the jets were operating from abandoned stretches of Autobahn, barely fueled, guarded by half-trained crews. Often, the pilots were aces from the old Luftwaffe squadrons, men in their 30s flying against American teenagers with twice the numbers and infinite supplies. But still, when the 262s came, Allied formations broke. January 1945, the U.S. 8th Air Force launched Operation Clarion STB. Full-throttle air assault on German transportation hubs meant to cripple the Reich's ability to move supplies, troops, and, critically, jet parts. But the Luftwaffe was ready. Waiting, Major Walter Nowotny, the first commander of Kommando Nowotny, Germany's elite jet squadron, had studied Allied flight patterns. His plan was brutal. Wait for bomber formations to cross deep into Germany, just out of escort range, low on fuel, and then strike with shock attacks. Me-262s would scream down from 30,000 feet, fire once, and pull away. No turning, no dogfighting. It worked. For a time. But then the Allies changed their game. In a small intelligence room outside Cambridge, Royal Air Force analysts were poring over post-mission reports when one phrase kept recurring: hit while turning. Again and again. Me-262s weren't being caught in the air. They were being hit while climbing, landing, or taxiing. The RAF realized the fatal flaw of jet aircraft. They were fast in the air, but sluggish on the ground. The Jumo 04 engines needed 30 seconds to spool up. During that time, the aircraft was vulnerable, slow, practically motionless. Göring had insisted the jets be used as interceptors. But the Allies now knew the secret. You don't intercept a jet, you ambush it. So they did. The RAF created clobber squadrons, small units of low-altitude fighter bombers tasked specifically with hunting. Me-262s during takeoff and landing, P-51 Mustangs, flying in loose pairs, would circle near known 262 bases, just outside radar detection. The moment a jet began taxiing, the Mustangs swooped in low and fast, unleashing gunfire and bombs before the German pilot could even get airborne. It was dirty work, but devastatingly effective. Within weeks, losses mounted. Half the Me-262s destroyed in early 1945 were taken out on the ground. Back in Germany, Hans von Ohain heard the news like a father reading his child's obituary. He had long since been pushed out of the Me-262 program. The engine, his engine, had been modified, corrupted, mass-produced with substandard alloys, bolted into frames designed for politics, not physics. He rarely spoke now, worked quietly in a small lab near Stuttgart, designing gas turbines for post-war power generation. But one night, walking past a pub, he overheard two Wehrmacht officers discussing the jet losses. "They've learned how to kill them," one said. "The bastards aren't afraid anymore." Von Ohain stopped in the snow. He said nothing. Just stood there, staring into the night sky. He thought of 1935, of the first sketch on tracing paper, of the Heinkel test flight, of what the engine could have been. Now, it was just another weapon on the losing side of history. March 1945. Germany is collapsing. The Rhine is breached. The Soviets are inside Berlin's outer defenses. Oil is gone. Ammunition scarce. Luftwaffe pilots are flying one mission per engine, because that's all the engines can handle. In one final desperate push, Hitler orders all Me-262s to be used as bombers, not fighters. His fantasy of jet revenge refuses to die. Pilots protest. Engineers groan. But orders are orders. The fastest fighter on Earth becomes the slowest dive bomber in history. Dozens are lost in minutes, shot down by anti-aircraft guns and swarming Mustangs, caught in their slow climbs, their landing approaches, their vulnerable spool-up windows. By April, only a handful remain operational. And yet, the fear never fully leaves, even after the war ends. Even when Allied pilots walk through captured German hangars and run their hands along the cool, curved fuselages of these machines, there's a reverence. They ask the same question, again and again. What if the Germans had more time? Because if they had, the skies would have never belonged to the Allies again. May 1945. Germany was ash. Cities flattened. Fuel depots empty. Airfields silent, except for the wind. The Luftwaffe, once the most feared air force on Earth, was gone. Its final pilots were boys, barely trained, shot down before their engines even warmed. And the Me-262, the miracle machine that was supposed to save the Reich, sat abandoned in hangars across a ruined nation, sleek, silver, and useless. When Allied forces entered those airfields, they found the jets lined up like museum pieces from the future. Engineers stared at them in disbelief. Some thought they were prototypes. Others thought they were hoaxes. But once the covers came off the engines and the panels were removed, the truth sank in. This was real, and it was decades ahead of anything the Allies had. Within weeks, every victorious power, Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union, sent teams to strip the airfields clean. Crates of engines, half-finished blueprints, and disassembled fuselages vanished onto trucks. What Germany had failed to win with its jets, the Allies would win by learning from them. Hans Joachim von Ohain was taken quietly into Allied custody. He wasn't treated like a prisoner, more like an artifact. The Americans wanted to know how he had done it, how a young engineer with a rejected idea had invented the engine that changed the future of flight. They asked him questions for days, about turbine temperatures, about fuel compression, about thrust-to-weight ratios. He answered each one in the same calm, detached tone, as though describing the weather. When one officer asked him if he regretted it, he hesitated. Then he said softly, "Regret the engine? No. Regret what it was used for? Every day." He was offered a choice: remain in shattered Germany under Soviet watch, or work in America under Operation Paperclip, the secret Allied program to recruit German scientists. He chose silence first, but hunger and the need to protect his family forced his hand. By 1947, he was working for the U.S. Air Force, side by side with engineers who had once tried to shoot down his creations. And beside him, ironically, was his rival across the channel, Frank Whittle, the British pioneer who had been developing his own jet engine at the same time. Two men, once divided by war, now united by obsession. Together, they built the foundation of modern aviation, but von Ohain never liked the title Father of the Jet. He said, "Fathers raised things to live." His invention had been raised to kill. He avoided interviews. He never visited museums that displayed Me-262s. When shown photos of wreckage from the war, he looked away. His work now focused on peaceful applications: turbines for electricity, engines for research aircraft, concepts for supersonic flight that would carry people, not bombs. In one lecture at a university in 1955, he told his students, "A machine has no morality. Only its maker does. The engine itself is innocent. It only magnifies what men already are." And in a strange twist of fate, the very engine that had once terrified Allied pilots became the beating heart of the post-war world. Commercial jets, supersonic fighters, passenger liners spanning oceans in hours instead of days. Every one of them carried a little of von Ohain's rejected design: the curved blades, the compressor stages, the core principles of the engine that Germany had once called impossible. By the 1960s, the same sound that had made bomber crews scream in terror was now the sound of progress, the sound of people going home, not to war. When von Ohain died in 1998, he left behind no medals, no personal fortune, and no military honors. Just a single handwritten note found in his papers, folded around a faded photograph of the He-178, his first jet. The note read, In another time, perhaps this would have been a gift. And maybe it was, because the same engine that once darkened the skies with fear now carried the world into the age of light and speed. The war ended in fire, but from its embers rose something astonishing. The legacy of one German engineer's rejected engine that forever changed the way humanity touched the sky. Changed the way humanity touched the sky.